welcome to the Harber Show. This is part 2 of our special 2-part series with author Philip Anschutz. Philip, again, thank you for joining me.
Thank you, Aaron.
Appreciate having you. We're talking, of course, about Out Where the West Begins. With this show, this second part, I'd like to really try to cover as many of your subjects as possible. And let's start off with Cyrus McCormick. I had told you, I was fascinated about how competition drove him to constantly improve his product. But what was your overall take on McCormick?
Well, let me, for your viewers, let me set the framework of the book. It's 50 individuals who were business people, all business people, very entrepreneurial. And the time period was 1800 to 1920. Now, this was a time of change. There was invention, there was technology. You needed people, business people, who could marshal the resources, deal with rapidly changing events, the introduction of technology and so forth, who could raise the capital, who could find the labor, create the factories, the manufacturing, whatever it was. Cyrus McCormick was a great example of that. His invention, it was called the Reaper at the time, was able to dramatically increase production. Keep in mind, in 1800, over 90% of the population of the then United States were farmers. By 1920, just 120 years later, it was less than 10%. 90% lived in towns and cities. So the impact of that was to create an industrial base who could work in factories and manufacturing, and there was enough of an agricultural community supported by technology. Again, McCormick was a great example of having made this happen, where you were able to feed the population, release them to work in other jobs. The result was that by 1920, America was the #1 economic power in the world. 1800, it was hardly on the map.
Yeah, extraordinary. What about, I was fascinated by John Wesley Iliff and how he literally, and we talked about Charles Goodnight in part 1, but Iliff was really the man who transformed the American diet. And suddenly beef became part of that diet, and most people don't realize prior to him that really wasn't the case.
Their large-scale ranching operations and the ability to supply a dependable supply of beef depended on several things: the right grazing conditions, the right weather conditions, railroads, refrigeration, and access to packing plants. Those were the things that eventually drove large-scale production. Whereas you started out with just a few animals running at times wild on the plains with no business plan. Iliff changed that and was highly regarded in the industry. He depended on others who came before him, like Charles Goodnight was a good example. But that's how the industry began. And there was one other thing that happened, and that was investment. Primarily British and Scottish investment came into this country willing and able to invest in agricultural operations. That's how those operations really got their first economic foundation.
We touched on when we're looking at specific events, and we mentioned in the first show Charles Betcher. I was really amused and impressed with, from a PR perspective, when he attempted to burn a building down. Talk about that, because of course the building didn't burn down, but what a spectacular PR move. That has to be up there in the top annals.
Well, it is, and it's funny you should pick that example. These business individuals helped to create the real image of the American West. Now, how did they do that? Why did they do that? because they had things to sell. They needed to communicate with a buying public. And I don't care whether you're Samuel Colt and you have guns you have to sell, or you're Coors and you have beer to sell, or if you're railroads, you're selling tickets to passengers, you're selling land to settlers. If you're in the real estate business, you're selling lots or homes. You have to create a marketing campaign, and these were very early attempts at that. Or you create some publicity event like Betcher, which can be communicated. And so this early image, I'll come back to this, but these early images of the West were created by these very individuals that founded a lot of these early companies. And the reason they did it is they had to do it.
They didn't have any choice. What about, one of the things it kind of almost saddened me, though, was reading the story about Henry Huntington. And here's a man who created this extraordinary intra-city rail system for Los Angeles. And I was thinking, and of course most Americans have no idea that even existed in Los Angeles, and that you had the ability, you had essentially a public transportation system that was a model for the world. But of course it was literally just torn down, and freeways replaced it. Wasn't that really a great loss in retrospect, or was it?
It was so ahead of the times. By the way, as I recall, it was about 11,000 miles of rail, streetcar lines, rail lines, light rail lines, and it was the most modern in the world at the time. It disappeared. It was taken out of service. Some of those rail lines ended up being streets and paved over. A few are still used. I came to own the remnants of that system. And what we weren't actively using, we sold to the city and the towns in the LA basin so they could bring them back into service for commuter lines. So a small part of it was saved, most of it back in the 30s and 40s, really with the advent of the automobile, disappeared.
It's, I was thinking to replicate that system today would probably cost something like $100 billion or some extraordinary amount.
Well, who knows what it would cost? But the practical answer is you can't do it, because you can't get a public project built anywhere today.
Why not?
Because no one wants it in their backyard. There's too many people, there's too many activists that will campaign against you. You can't hardly get something done. You couldn't build a railroad in this country today.
That's really unfortunate.
Well,
when you
of course
think
it
about
is. But you can't get public projects that serve the public hardly built. Very difficult to get things done today. Keep in mind, when most of this progress was made, and I've talked about the very short time period here of 120 years, there were several things that allowed that to happen. One of the things that allowed it to happen is government interference and involvement was at an all-time low.
And also, when you look at the West, especially in the early part of that time, it was wide open. You didn't have the population that would resist projects as you would today. All right, we're going to take a break. We'll be right back with Philip Anschutz.
In business, just like in life, trust is at the basis of almost everything.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
Hi, I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Because I've never done endorsements or commercials, people ask how are our programs funded, especially because we provide them as a public service to all our broadcast outlets. It's expensive to produce our show, whether we do them here in Denver or go to places such as Aspen, Washington, D.C., or even Iraq. The answer is we depend on contributions to support our work to bring you some of the nation's top opinion leaders. Individuals, businesses, foundations, and other nonprofits make tax-deductible contributions to the Democracy and Media Education Foundation to help allow us to continue to work for you. To find out more, to make a donation, just go to dmefd.org. The DMEF is a tax-exempt public charitable organization and has promised to dedicate 100% of every contribution to support our public affairs initiatives. If you believe, as I do, in the need for a forum which promotes civil discourse and mutually respectful discussion, I hope you'll decide to make a contribution today. I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scenes photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
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 I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch The Aaron Harber Show and Keep Hope Alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbortv.com.
Welcome back to the show. We're with Philip Anschutz talking about Out Where the West Begins. So Phil, John Jacob Astor, you have a line in the book about how resilient he was, and I'll read a part of it. It says, his ability to absorb setbacks and transform them into long-term gains. I thought that was really something that everybody likes to be able to do, but very few can. Talk a little bit about how he did that and what set him apart.
Let me talk about the attribute first of being able to absorb reverses. The people in this book, Astor was just one example, but every one of them had reverses. Every one of them had setbacks. Every one of them had negative things that people would say. Every one of them risked their reputations, risked their fortunes, and by the way, in some cases, their lives. But the ability to do that and to bounce back, to me, has a connection to the ability of an individual to accept and absorb risk. Now, when you're talking about a business person, or perhaps an entrepreneur, or even a visionary of some kind, you have to be able to absorb losses, accept risk. Huge attribute here to these individuals. Now, let me also say that in fact, there's a painting in the book, Aaron, and some people would say that's an odd painting to have in a book about the American West. There are, as you know, some Western paintings also in the book, but why is this painting showing Columbus departing for the New World in this book? And the reason is, to me, it's a very important painting, and it has a lot of meaning to me personally. But it shows Columbus pointing to the west, and to me, it means a clean start, a new break, a starting over. All of these individuals had reverses and problems that came into their lives. All of them, by the way, started with one profession. Maybe they had failures, maybe they couldn't make it work, maybe their ideas weren't well-founded. They had to start over with something else. Keep in mind, when Columbus pointed to the west, he didn't know where he was going, and it wasn't the reason that he went. When he got there, it wasn't for the purpose he went for in the first place. And what he achieved was totally different than what he set out to achieve. That is an example of a lot of these individuals.
I was amazed at how many not only failed on a large scale, a lot of them took a decade or 2 decades before they kind of found their niche, their footing, or their success. So it's a lot of them started young. I was intrigued by the number I thought, disproportionate that came from Europe, especially from Germany, and had such an impact on this country. What was your take on the immigration impact?
It was big. You mentioned German. There was a lot with German heritage. A lot of the people there were wanting to get out. There were certainly at certain periods there were wars going on. There were problems. There were problems with being drafted into the army. So they were looking for a place to go.
Or persecuted.
Or persecuted. They were looking for a place to go. The second thing that, most of these individuals were not highly educated. They were self-educated. Now, some were highly educated, but by and large, the majority were not. It was kind of a trial and error. Did they have curiosity? Were they able to learn? Were they able to pick up new ideas and concepts quickly and then rationalize them into a program or an idea that was implementable? Could they do that? A lot of these individuals are quite unusual in that way.
Wouldn't that be pretty tough to do today?
Well, I think it goes on all the time, probably, but I think it's tougher to be in business today, by far. But with so many of the restrictions and other things that kind of can cause delays. But keep in mind, at the time, setting up a business out in the middle of the frontier wasn't exactly an easy task either.
No, not at all. I was interested in Frederick Weyerhaeuser's delegation to George Long of so much authority, and that delegation generated so much success. Talk about Weyerhaeuser and your take on him, and Long as well.
Part of it, I thought, was brought about by need, just the distance and time from where the two gentlemen were, and Weyerhaeuser had other business interests as well. So that was part of it. But really the important part was trust. In business, just like in life, trust is at the basis of almost everything.
All right, we're going to take our break on that note. We'll be back for our final segment with Philip Anschutz in just a moment. What did you learn from doing this book and writing, putting pen to paper and doing this book? What kind of came out of this for you?
We all wonder, can we do something we've never done before? I'm not claiming that I did too good a job at it, but I was frankly surprised that it turned out as well as it did for my first effort.
For information on how to help promote civil and mutually respectful discourse and support expansion of the distribution of our programs, please email info@harbertv.com.
I'm Aaron Harber, host of The Aaron Harber Show. Find us on Facebook to get all the latest updates, see behind-the-scene photos, and make comments and ask me questions. You can see episodes before their TV broadcast, so like the show today.
Join me and watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch The Aaron Harber Show.
Watch the Aaron Harper Show.
Watch the Aaron Harber Show.
I'm Reverend Jesse Jackson. Watch the Aaron Harber Show and keep hope alive.
The Aaron Harber Show may be viewed 24/7 at no charge from any location in the world at www.harbertv.com.
Welcome back to the show. This is our final segment in part 2 of our 2-part series with Philip Anschutz, talking about his book, Out Where the West Begins. All right, Phil, I know we have very little time. I wanted you to talk about the Big Four. Give us kind of the overview of their importance and what they did.
Thank you, Aaron. The Big Four their first company was called Central Pacific Railroad, then became the Southern Pacific Railroad. They had a tremendous impact and influence in California and the development of California. And it extended far beyond just the railroad. Started with the railroad, but it extended into banking and insurance and real estate and many other things. These four individuals, and I'm sure a lot of your viewers know that history, but these four individuals were shopkeepers in Sacramento. And they were approached by a fellow by the name of Theodore Judah with the concept of building a transcontinental railroad. Now,
And Judah had gone to others who had said no.
he had gone to others. He had come up with the concept. He'd walked the route. He'd done so much. But he came to these four individuals who at the time, as I mentioned, were shopkeepers, hoping to take advantage of the discovery of gold in the California gold fields. In any event, they agreed to advance capital. What people probably don't know about these four, and it was Mark Hopkins, Collis Huntington, Leland Stanford, Charlie Crocker, is just by chance they all had the requisite skills in one area. Crocker, as an example, was a construction genius and in organizing large-scale projects. Stanford was fabulous at being a politician. Huntington was a strategist, a political strategist, great with financing. Mark Hopkins was great on the financial side and keeping the books and making sure that the financial underpinnings of this very large construction project was sound. So just by chance, these four desperate shopkeepers came together in a partnership, and they all brought unusual skills that supported each other.
And made the investment of their lives.
And made the investment of
put
their
it on
lives.
there. Speaking of California, Amadeo Giannini, who ultimately created Bank of America. I was intrigued by his focus on kind of the common person. And that was his business model, and his lack of interest in accumulating wealth, where a lot of your subjects, not all though, a lot of your subjects very much were focused on accumulating wealth. He didn't seem to be that interested at all in becoming a rich person, though he could have easily been very rich if he wanted to. Tell me your take on Giannini.
Well, my view, and by the way, he was an innovator. I'll touch on that in a minute. But I think he was more interested in creating value as opposed to creating wealth. Value. So he focused on, as you say, smaller borrowers, smaller companies initially when he started out. And then he came up with a very unusual idea. Instead of just one bank, why not multiple banks? Why not multiple banks spread out in a lot of places? Why not branch banking? Now, that was opposed by many people at the time. But that was the real start and underpinnings of Bank of America. When they were able to do that, they grew very quickly.
So,
and created value for a lot of people, not just wealth, but value, the ability to transact, to borrow money.
And it took another 100 years before branch banking was allowed everywhere in the country. That to me, that alone was almost bizarre. What about the image of the West? And I want you to talk about Carl Laemmle and, of course, Buffalo Bill Cody.
I don't know what you think of or what your viewers think of when they think of the American West, but it's got an image about it, this code of the West. What people are supposed to act like, how they're supposed to operate, how they're supposed to keep their word, how they project themselves, all of these things. So where did that come from? And by the way, part of it's factual, and as we both know, part of it's mythical. People developed those themes, but it came together at some point in terms of this is what the American West is. Now, the big part of it was created early by the artist and and the writers and the photographers in terms of creating this imagery of the West. But another part of it, and very important part, came about with Lamley and movies. He specialized in these early Western movies and portrayed what the image of a Western man and woman should be. Buffalo Bill Cody did the same thing by taking this in his Wild West shows. He took them,
Around the world.
around the country and around the world.
Yeah.
And that was people's popular perception, which they could see through imagery, movies, and of course the real thing, these Wild West shows. But that's how a lot of the view of what the American West was supposed to be like. And fact became fiction, and fiction became fact, and it came together.
I was impressed with Buffalo Bill Cody's diversification of business interests. I had no concept before reading your book of how he was really an astute businessman.
Well,
At least for part of the time.
maybe. I would say he was an astute marketer, and he was able to craft an image and communicate it, and was great at marketing. Astute businessman, not so much. In some of the business practices that he did, and eventually he lost his company.
Right, lost everything.
Yeah, which was sad.
Became an employee.
Yeah.
What did you learn from writing, from doing this book and writing, putting pen to paper and doing this book? What kind of came out of this for you?
We all wonder, can we do something we've never done before? I'm not claiming that I did too good a job at it, but I was frankly surprised that it turned out as well as it did for my first effort. We can all do things if we'll just try them. So that was one thing. Second thing, all the interesting stories and the lives, and as you dig deeper and deeper into a lot of the individuals that are involved, and you learn about their family lives and their histories. In the book, I try and start with what they were like growing up, or what their environment was like, or to show that, look, these are just people, and they lead normal lives just like you and I and everyone else.
Today, obviously today we're almost a century away from the end of your stories, and 2 centuries, more than 2 centuries from the beginning. What do you think it means to be from the American West today? Does it have a significant meaning anymore?
I think it does, because I think people still have this image of the American West, and it's recognized, and you see it all over the world as well. Western art is appreciated and known all over the world today. Why? Is it because it's great art? Maybe not. Is it because it reflects and communicates a lifestyle? I think so.
Phil, thank you so much for joining me today.
Aaron, thank you. This has been fun.
It's been very interesting talking about the American West, and of course we're going to look forward to Philip Anschutz's next book as well. I'm Aaron Harber. Thanks for watching.
Please contact us. We want to hear from you. And thanks for watching.